A child's innocent cry cuts through the hushed murmur of a first-class cabin. A woman's hand adorned with expensive rings has just cracked across a 10-year-old boy's face over a simple seating dispute. The boy's family is frozen in a state of shock and outrage, dismissed by the flight crew and sneered at by the aggressor. They appear powerless, just another black family being humiliated at 30,000 feet. But what nobody on that plane, not the entitled passenger, not the indifferent crew, not even the captain in the cockpit knows, is that the boy's quiet father is about to make a single, simple request. A request that will ground the plane and bring the entire airline to its knees. Stay tuned to witness the moment one pilot's announcement delivered the most satisfying karma imaginable. The air in the Aerovista Airlines Polaris lounge at LAX hummed with a quiet, expensive energy. It was the scent of premium coffee, faint designer perfume, and the low murmur of conversations about stock options and vacation homes in Aspen. For the Hayes family, it was simply a pocket of calm before the chaos of a long-haul flight to London. David Hayes watched his two children, a gentle smile gracing his features. 12-year-old Maya was deeply engrossed in a book. Her brow furrowed in concentration, while 10-year-old Leo was meticulously arranging sugar packets into a fortress on the small table between them. Leo was a boy whose energy was a bright, crackling thing, but he knew with the ingrained understanding of a well-raised child that here was a place for his inside voice and his inside body. "Are you sure you don't want another croissant, Leo?" Dr. Lena Hayes asked, her voice a warm melody that always seemed to put her family at ease. She was a respected pediatrician, a woman whose calm demeanor hid a fierce, protective instinct that David knew well. "No, thank you, Mom. I'm saving room for the airplane ice cream," Leo said, with the solemn gravity only a 10-year-old could apply to dessert. David chuckled, catching Lena's eye. This trip was special. It was a celebration of their 15th wedding anniversary, and more importantly, a reward for the kids' stellar school reports. He had promised them London, the Tower, Buckingham Palace, the Harry Potter studio tour, the works. He had booked 4 seats in Aerovista's coveted first-class cabin, 2A, 2B, 2D, and 2E, a perfect family block in the center of the cabin, ensuring they could share the entire experience together. It had cost a small fortune, but for David, money was a tool, and its best use was crafting memories for the people he loved. David Hayes was a man who moved through the world with an unassuming quietness that often led people to underestimate him. He wore a simple dark grey Henley and comfortable jeans, a stark contrast to the sharp suits and bespoke blazers around him. He didn't look like a man who had built a tech empire from his garage, sold it for a figure with 9 zeros, and then pivoted into private equity, acquiring and revitalizing legacy companies. He just looked like a dad, a tired, happy dad, on vacation with his family. The boarding call for flight AV282 to London Heathrow finally came. A polite announcement rippled through the lounge, and the Hayes family gathered their belongings. Leo carefully swept the sugar packets into a napkin before binning them. At the gate, however, the first crack in their perfect vacation appeared. The gate agent, a harried-looking woman named Susan, scanned their boarding passes with a frown. "Right, Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, you're in 2A and 2B. Maya, you're in 3E, and Leo, you're in 7A. David's smile faded. "I'm sorry, there must be a mistake. I booked our seats together months ago. 2A, BD, and E." He had the confirmation email ready on his phone, the seat map clearly showing their 4-person pod selected. Susan didn't look at his phone. She typed furiously into her terminal, her expression souring. "The system shows an equipment change. The configuration is different. There was a reassignment. 7A is still a first-class seat." "I understand, but he's 10. Lena said, her professional calm firmly in place, though David could see the tension in her jaw. "We can't have our 10-year-old son sitting 5 rows away from us on an 11-hour international flight." "He's not unaccompanied," Susan said, dismissively, her eyes already scanning for the next passengers in line. "You're on the same plane. It's the best we can do. The flight is completely full." "That's not an acceptable solution," David said, his voice still gentle, but now with a spine of steel. "Could you please check if there's anyone willing to switch? We specifically booked these seats to be together as a family." Susan let out an audible theatrical sigh. "Sir, everyone in first class paid a lot of money to choose their seat. We can't start moving people around. You'll have to ask someone on board. Now I need to board the other passengers." She stamped their passes and handed them back, her body language a clear dismissal. The family was nudged forward by the growing line behind them. David looked at Lena, a silent conversation passing between them. "We'll sort it out on the plane." But as they walked down the jet bridge, a cold knot of apprehension began to form in David's stomach. It was the familiar, weary feeling of having to fight for things that should be simple. The feeling that despite all his success, the world still sometimes saw him and his family through a distorted, prejudiced lens. He just hoped this flight wouldn't be one of those times. The first-class cabin of the Aerovista Boeing 707 was an oasis of muted greys and brushed metal. The seats, or suites as the airline called them, were cocoons of privacy and luxury. As the Hayes family stepped aboard, they were greeted by a flight attendant named Mark, whose smile seemed more a matter of training than genuine warmth. "Welcome aboard," he chirped, glancing at their tickets. David quickly explained the situation. "Hi, Mark. We've been separated by a system error. Our 10-year-old son has been assigned seat 7A 5 rows behind us. Is there anything you can do? We were originally booked in 2D and 2E. Mark's smile faltered for a second. "Oh dear. Let me see what's going on." He consulted a tablet. "Ah yes, seats 2D and 2E are occupied. A last-minute booking, it seems. Let me speak to the passengers." The occupants of 2D and 2E were an elderly couple who looked kindly but explained apologetically that the husband had a medical condition and needed the aisle access of 2D. David understood immediately and thanked them, not wanting to cause them any distress. "Okay," David said, turning back to Mark. "What about 3E, where our daughter is? Can we at least get Leo next to his sister? 3E is next to 3F, Mark stated, as if this were a complex logistical problem. "Let's go and have a word with the passenger in 3F. The passenger in 3F was a businessman already deeply focused on his laptop, a pair of noise-cancelling headphones firmly in place. He looked up with annoyance as Mark explained the situation. "You want me to move?" the man asked, incredulous. "I specifically chose this window seat. I need to work. I'm not moving." He put his headphones back on a clear end to the conversation. Frustration was now simmering within Lena. "So what are our options?" she asked Mark, her voice sharp. "Our son cannot sit by himself surrounded by strangers." Mark's professional veneer was cracking, replaced by a flustered impatience. "Ma'am, the flight is full. The only open seat next to another open seat is... well, there isn't one. The best I can do is ask the passenger next to your son in 7B if they would be willing to move to your daughter's seat in 3E. It was a messy, imperfect solution, but it was something. "Okay," David said. "Please, let's try that." As they walked back through the cabin towards row 7, David felt the stares. They were the problem passengers, the family disrupting the serene pre-flight calm. He settled Maya into her seat at 3E, promising they'd get it sorted. When they reached row 7, David's heart sank. Seated in 7B, the aisle seat next to Leo's window assignment, was a woman who radiated an aura of formidable displeasure. She was in her late 50s, impeccably dressed in a cream-colored cashmere travel suit, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed. Her name, David would soon learn, was Karen Miller. She was already sipping a glass of champagne, her thin lips pursed as she watched them approach. Mark, clearly intimidated, began his spiel. "Excuse me, madame, we have a small seating issue. This young boy," he gestured to Leo, "was separated from his family. We were wondering if you would be so kind as to switch with his sister's seat up in 3E. It's also a first-class suite." Karen Miller looked from Mark to David, then down at Leo. Her gaze was cold, appraising and deeply dismissive. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her champagne before speaking. "Absolutely not," she said, her voice crisp and laced with ice. "I'm in my assigned seat. I paid for this seat. I specifically chose a seat in the rear of the first-class cabin for privacy. I will not be moving." "Ma'am, it's just a few rows up," Mark pleaded weakly. "The family was—" "I don't care what the family was," she interrupted, a sneer twisting her lips as she looked at David and Lena. "Perhaps people should learn to plan their travel more effectively. This is not my problem." Lena stepped forward. "Ma'am, he is my 10-year-old son. I'm sure you can understand why we don't want him sitting alone for an entire transatlantic flight." Karen's eyes narrowed, a cruel glint appearing within them. "And I'm sure you can understand that I paid over $10,000 for a peaceful flight, not to be a part of someone else's family drama. He looks old enough to sit still and watch a movie. He'll be fine." The thinly veiled racism was suffocating. The implication was clear, your kind of family drama. David put a calming hand on Lena's arm. He could feel the tremor of her anger. He turned back to Mark. "This is an unacceptable safety issue. Your airline separated a minor from his parents. You have a duty of care to resolve this." "What is the solution?" Mark stammered, completely out of his depth. "Sir, I've asked. My hands are tied. The purser is busy with the pre-flight manifest. Perhaps once we're in the air." "No," David said, and his voice dropping to a low, serious tone that made Mark flinch. "This needs to be resolved before we take off." But it was too late. The cabin doors were closing. The announcement for final preparations was being made. Defeated for the moment, David and Lena had no choice but to retreat to their own seats in row 2, leaving their son 5 rows behind them, next to a woman who looked at him as if he were a piece of vermin that had somehow snuck into her pristine world. As David sat down, he made a promise to himself. He would not let this go. The flight had barely begun, but for Aerovista Airlines, a storm was gathering. The Boeing 777 rumbled to life, the powerful engines spooling up with a deep thrum that vibrated through the cabin floor. For most of the first-class passengers, it was a familiar, soothing sound, the prelude to a journey of comfort and champagne. For David and Lena Hayes, it was the sound of a cage door locking. From their seats in 2A and 2B, they could just see the top of Leo's head, 5 rows back if they craned their necks. Every parental instinct screamed at them to be closer. Lena was a coiled spring of anxiety, her hands clenched in her lap. "David, I can't do this for 11 hours," she whispered, her voice tight. "I'm going to go back there and sit on the floor next to him if I have to." "I know, Lena. Just give me a minute." David said, his own calmness a facade he was struggling to maintain. He was observing, processing. He watched the flight attendant, Mark, studiously avoiding their section of the cabin. He saw the purser, a stern-faced older woman, bustling about, completely ignoring the issue that had been raised. It was a systemic failure, a complete breakdown of customer service and basic human decency. He decided to try a different approach. He pressed the call button. After a long moment, a different flight attendant, a young woman named Chloe, appeared. "Yes, sir. Can I get you something?" "My name is David Hayes. My son Leo is in 7A. We've been separated. Your colleague Mark was unable to help. I need to speak to the purser, please." Chloe's eyes widened slightly. She had clearly been briefed on the problem family. "The purser is very busy with takeoff preparations, sir. As soon as we reach cruising altitude, I'll be sure to send her over." It was another brush-off, another delay tactic. The plane took off, a powerful surge, pressing them back into their seats as it climbed through the clouds above Los Angeles. Once the seatbelt sign pinged off, Lena was on her feet. "I'm going to check on him." As she walked down the aisle, she saw it. Karen Miller had already reclined her seat, fully encroaching on Leo's space. Leo, bless his heart, was trying to make himself as small as possible in his window seat. He had his headphones on, watching a cartoon, but his small tray table was unusable because of the recline of the seat in front. He had a cup of apple juice, and to drink it, he had to hold it awkwardly in his lap. "Leo, honey, are you okay?" Lena asked, crouching in the aisle. Leo gave her a small, brave smile. "I'm okay, Mom. The lady told me not to touch the armrest." Lena's blood ran cold. She looked at Karen Miller, who was now wearing a silk eye mask, pretending to be asleep. "Excuse me," Lena said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Did you tell my son not to use his armrest?" Karen sighed dramatically and lifted one corner of her eye mask. "I suggested that he keep his flailing limbs to himself. This is my space. That is his. A simple concept he seems to be struggling with." "He is a 10-year-old child," Lena shot back, her voice rising despite her efforts to control it. "He is entitled to his armrest and his personal space, which you are currently invading by reclining your seat before the dinner service has even begun. I am entitled to recline my seat whenever I wish." Karen sniffed, pulling the mask back down. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm trying to rest." Other passengers were starting to peer over their suite walls, their expressions ranging from curiosity to annoyance at the disturbance. Lena felt a flush of humiliation and rage. She was being made to feel like the aggressor for simply defending her child. She retreated to her seat, her body trembling with fury. "David, that woman is a monster. She's bullying him." David's jaw was granite. "Okay, new plan." He wasn't just a father anymore. He was the chairman of the board of this airline, and he was witnessing a catastrophic failure of his company's values in real time. This was no longer just a personal issue. It was a professional one. He was conducting an impromptu, deeply personal audit of his own investment. He watched as the meal service began. Mark, the flight attendant, seemed to go out of his way to be obsequious to Karen Miller, refilling her wine glass, laughing at a comment she made. When he served Leo, he did so with a perfunctory haste, barely making eye contact. David saw Leo trying to juggle his meal tray on his lap because his tray table was still blocked. He was trying his best to be neat, to be careful. But the inevitable happened. As the plane hit a small pocket of turbulence, a little bit of the apple juice from his cup sloshed over the side, a tiny dribble landing on the sleeve of Karen Miller's cream-colored cashmere suit. It was only a few drops. insignificant. But Karen Miller reacted as if she'd been doused with acid. "You clumsy, incompetent little brat!" Karen Miller's shriek sliced through the ambient noise of the cabin. She ripped off her eye mask, her face a mask of pure fury. She wasn't looking at the tiny, damp spot on her sleeve. She was glaring at Leo with a hatred that was terrifying in its intensity. Leo froze his eyes wide with fear. I'm sorry," he stammered, his lip trembling. "It was an accident. The plane bumped. An accident. You think I care?" Karen was unbuckling her seatbelt, leaning over the armrest, her face inches from his. "This suit is handmade. It costs more than your entire family probably makes in a month. You people have no respect for anything, for anyone's property." The racist dog whistle had become a blaring foghorn. Several passengers were now openly staring. In row 2, David and Lena were already on their feet, their hearts pounding with a primal fear. They started moving down the aisle, but the meal carts were blocking their path. "Please, ma'am, calm down," Mark, the flight attendant, said. Finally, arriving at the scene, his face pale. "It was just a little spill." "It's not just a little spill," she screeched, turning her venom on him. "It's a lack of discipline, a lack of parenting. This is what happens when you let just anyone into first class." Lena, pushing past a cart, finally reached them. "That is enough. Do not speak to my son that way." Leo, overwhelmed by the shouting and the terrifying anger directed at him, started to cry. It wasn't a loud wail, but a series of quiet, hiccuping sobs that were far more heartbreaking. He reached a small hand out, as if to placate the angry woman, perhaps to try and wipe the spot on her sleeve. It was that small, innocent gesture that sent Karen Miller over the edge. "Don't you touch me," she snarled. And then it happened. In a swift, shocking motion, she raised her hand and slapped him. It wasn't a punch. It was a sharp, stinging slap across his cheek. The sound, the crisp, ugly crack of flesh on flesh, was obscene in the controlled environment of the airplane. For a single horrifying second, the entire cabin fell into a dead silence. The only sound was the hum of the engines and Leo's gasp, which turned into a sharp, pain-filled cry. A bright red handprint was already blooming on his brown-tone skin. Time seemed to slow down. Lena let out a cry of her own, a raw, maternal sound of pure anguish, and lunged forward, shielding Leo with her body. "How dare you! How dare you put your hands on my child!" David arrived a second later. But unlike Lena, he wasn't shouting. The anger radiating from him was a different thing entirely. It was a cold, silent, white-hot fury that seemed to suck all the oxygen out of the air around him. He didn't look at Karen. He didn't look at the gawking passengers. He knelt down and gently pulled Leo into his arms. He murmured soft words into his son's ear, his large frame a protective shield. He checked his son's face, his touch infinitely gentle. Then he stood up. He looked at Mark, the flight attendant, who was standing frozen, his mouth agape. "You saw that," David said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. He then turned his gaze to Karen Miller. She was breathing heavily, a triumphant, ugly sneer on her face, as if she had just won a great victory. "He needed to be taught a lesson," she said, trying to justify her assault. David's eyes were like chips of ice. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Every word he spoke was quiet, precise, and carried the weight of an avalanche. "You just assaulted a minor on an international flight. That is a federal offense," he said slowly, enunciating each word. He then looked at Mark again, his gaze unwavering. "This aircraft is a crime scene. I want the captain informed. Immediately. Mark, finally jolted out of his stupor by the gravity of David's words, just nodded dumbly. But David wasn't finished. He held the flight attendant's terrified gaze. "And tell the captain," he added, his voice dropping even lower, so only Mark could hear. "Tell him that Mr. Hayes on board has invoked the Aerovista 1 protocol. Tell him to call the number on the manifest. Now." Mark had no idea what Aerovista 1 protocol meant, but the authority with which David spoke sent a shiver of fear down his spine. He turned and practically ran towards the cockpit, leaving a silent, stunned cabin in his wake. Karen Miller looked momentarily confused, then smug again, convinced that this was all just empty threats from a man who was clearly out of his depth. She had no idea that the world as she knew it was about to come crashing down around her. The minutes that followed David's chilling command felt stretched and distorted. The first-class cabin, usually a realm of clinking glasses and quiet conversation, was now thick with a tense, suffocating silence. Lena cradled Leo, who was still sobbing quietly against her shoulder, while Maya, who had come back to see what was happening, stood by with a look of pale shock. David remained standing in the aisle, a silent, immovable statue of resolve. He hadn't returned to his seat. He was a sentinel guarding his family and waiting. His stillness was more intimidating than any shouting could ever be. Karen Miller, however, seemed to regain her composure, misinterpreting the quiet as a victory. She sat back down, took a large gulp of her wine, and scoffed. "Such a drama queen," she muttered to the passenger across the aisle, who quickly looked away, wanting no part of the confrontation. To Karen, this was just another instance of her getting her way. She was wealthy, important, and used to people backing down. Up in the cockpit, a very different scene was unfolding. Mark, trembling slightly, relayed the message to the purser, who then knocked on the cockpit door. Captain Eva Rostova, a veteran pilot with over 20 years of experience, listened to the purser's frantic report with a deepening frown. "A passenger struck a child in first class." "Yes, Captain. And the father, he was very strange, very calm. He said to tell you that a Mr. Hayes is invoking Aerovista 1 protocol." Captain Rostova and her first officer exchanged a look. Aerovista 1 was a code they had been briefed on in a top-level memo just 3 months prior. It was a highly confidential directive to be used only in extreme circumstances, and it signified a direct, urgent order from the highest possible authority in the company, the chairman of the board himself. They had been told that if they ever heard that code, they were to follow the accompanying instructions without question. "Get me the manifest," Rostova ordered. She scanned the list. There it was, Hayes David, seat 2A. And next to it, a phone number labeled Heshum, A1 contact. Her first officer was already dialing the satellite phone. The call connected almost instantly. "This is the flight deck of Aerovista 282. The first officer said, his voice tense. "We were instructed to call this number." A calm, authoritative voice responded from the other end. "This is Amelia Vance, Executive Vice President of Operations for Aerovista. I've been expecting your call. Is Mr. Hayes secure?" Yes, he's in the cabin. There's been an incident." "I'm aware." Amelia's voice cut in, sharp and efficient. "The chairman has informed me. Here are your instructions, Captain. You are to immediately cease your current flight path to London. Turn the aircraft around. You are returning to LAX. Declare a passenger-related security threat as the reason. We will handle the rest on the ground." A corporate security team and law enforcement will be meeting your flight at the gate. Is that understood?" Captain Rostova took the phone. "Understood, Ms. Vance," turning back to LAX. There was no hesitation. An order connected to the Aerovista 1 protocol was not a request. A few moments later, the familiar chime for an announcement echoed through the cabin. But this time, the voice that came over the intercom was not the purser's, but Captain Rostova's. Her tone was firm, professional, and left no room for argument. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain speaking. Apologies for this interruption. Due to a security incident in the cabin that requires the immediate attention of law enforcement, we will be turning the aircraft around and returning to Los Angeles International Airport. We will be landing in approximately 40 minutes. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. Cabin crew, prepare the cabin for landing." The announcement sent a shockwave through the plane. A collective gasp was audible. Returning to the airport. This was not a minor issue. This was serious. A wave of murmurs erupted. "What happened? A security incident?" Karen Miller's smug expression finally melted away, replaced by a flicker of confusion, and then a dawning horror. She looked at David Hayes, who was still standing calmly, now looking directly at her. She tried to regain her footing. "This is ridiculous," she said loudly to no one in particular. "They're turning the whole plane around because that little brat started crying. They're probably kicking them off. Good riddance." But her bravado was hollow. Something was wrong. The way David Hayes was looking at her was not the look of a man about to be kicked off a flight. It was the look of a judge about to deliver a sentence. Lena, still comforting Leo, looked at her husband, a question in her eyes. David simply gave her hand a reassuring squeeze, a silent message passing between them. "It's being handled." As the plane began its wide, graceful turn back towards the California coast, the reality began to sink in for everyone. This wasn't about a spilled drink or a crying child anymore. The rules of the game had just been fundamentally changed by a pilot's announcement, and for Karen Miller, the descent was just beginning. The 777 landed at LAX with an eerie quiet. There was no cheerful announcement from the crew about connecting flights or baggage claim. As the plane taxied towards a secluded gate, the passengers could see flashing blue and red lights on the tarmac below. This was not a standard arrival. The moment the seatbelt sign switched off before anyone could even think of standing, Captain Rostova's voice came over the intercom again, sharp and commanding. "All passengers will remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. I repeat, all passengers are to remain seated. The doors will be opened by ground authorities. Please await their instructions." Karen Miller was now visibly sweating. The smug certainty had evaporated, replaced by a frantic, nervous energy. She kept glancing at David, then at the airplane door, then back again, as if trying to solve a terrifying puzzle. The jet bridge connected with a solid thud. The cabin door hissed open. But instead of a gate agent, 4 uniformed LAPD officers and 2 stern-looking individuals in dark suits stepped onto the plane. They were followed by a woman in a sharp corporate dress, her face a mask of controlled urgency. This was Amelia Vance, the EVP of Operations. She scanned the first-class cabin, her eyes immediately finding David. She walked directly to him, her expression a mixture of profound apology and professional respect. "Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice clear and carrying through the silent cabin. "I am so sorry. We came as soon as we heard. Are you and your family all right?" The use of his name, the deference in her tone, the sheer shock of seeing a top airline executive board, a plane flanked by police, It sent a ripple of confusion through the passengers. Karen Miller watched this interaction, her mind struggling to compute what she was seeing. Why were they apologizing to him? David just nodded. "Amelia, thank you for your promptness. My son Leo was assaulted by the passenger in seat 7B, Ms. Karen Miller." He gestured calmly towards Karen. Amelia Vance's gaze, which had been warm and apologetic towards David, turned to absolute ice as she looked at Karen. The two police officers moved purposefully down the aisle, stopping on either side of Karen's seat. "Karen Miller," one of the officers asked, his voice booming with authority. Karen was stunned into silence, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. "Ma'am," the officer continued, "we've been informed that you assaulted a minor on this aircraft. I need you to gather your personal belongings. You're coming with us." "What? No?" Karen finally found her voice, a high-pitched shriek of disbelief. "It was his fault. He was a menace. He ruined my suit. I am the victim here." The second officer looked at Mark, the flight attendant who was cowering near the galley. "Sir, did you witness the assault?" Mark, looking as if he was about to be sick, could only nod mutely. "Did you see this woman?" The officer pointed at Karen. "Strike the child." Mark swallowed hard and whispered, "Yes. Yes, I did." "That's all we need," the officer said, turning back to Karen. "Let's go, ma'am. Now." As the officers began to escort a now hysterical Karen Miller from her seat, she pointed a trembling finger at David. "Who even are you? What did you do? You have no right." It was then that Amelia Vance stepped forward, her voice ringing with a cold, clear finality that silenced the entire plane. "Ma'am, the man you are addressing is David Hayes, and he doesn't just have a right. He has the ultimate authority. Mr. Hayes is the new majority shareholder and the chairman of the board of Aerovista Airlines." The penny dropped. The sound of it was a collective silent gasp that sucked the air out of the cabin. The businessman in 3F, who had refused to move his seat, looked like he'd seen a ghost. The elderly couple in 2D and 2E exchanged looks of pure astonishment. And Karen Miller. Her face went through a rapid-fire series of emotions: confusion, disbelief, dawning comprehension, and finally utter soul-crushing horror. The $10,000 seat, the first-class privilege, the belief in her own superiority, it all dissolved into nothing. She hadn't just insulted a fellow passenger. She hadn't just assaulted a child. She had done it in front of the one man who owned the entire company, a man whose entire family she had belittled, racially profiled, and abused for the last 2 hours. Her protests died in her throat. Her body went limp as the officers led her away, her expensive cashmere suit now looking like a cheap costume. As she was guided down the jet bridge, a disgraced and broken woman, David Hayes, knelt once more to be level with his son. He was no longer the chairman of an airline. He was just a father whose quiet promise to handle the situation had just been fulfilled in the most spectacular way imaginable. With Karen Miller's hysterical sobs fading down the jet bridge, a profound and heavy silence settled over the first-class cabin of Flight AV282. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a luxury flight, but the stunned, airless vacuum that follows a lightning strike. The remaining passengers sat frozen in their multi-thousand-dollar suites, no longer anonymous travelers, but witnesses to a raw and brutal display of corporate karma. Every eye was fixed on David Hayes, the man in the simple Henley shirt who had just been revealed as the king of this airborne castle. Amelia Vance, the executive vice president, immediately understood that her first priority was not the logistics of the grounded plane, but the family at the heart of the storm. She approached them, her face a mask of profound professional and personal remorse. "Mr. Hayes, Dr. Hayes." She began, her voice low and steady, yet laced with a tremor of horror. "On behalf of every single employee at Aerovista, I am so sorry. This is a catastrophic failure on every level. It's the living embodiment of the cultural rot you told us you wanted to excise from this company. To have it happen to you, to your children, it's simply unforgivable." Lena, who was still gently stroking Leo's hair as he sat nestled against her, finally looked up. The fierce protective fire in her eyes hadn't dimmed. "It's not about us, Amelia," she said, her voice cutting through the corporate apologies with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. "That's what you need to understand. We are fine. We will be fine. But what if we hadn't been us? What if my husband was just a software engineer and I was just a pediatrician flying to see our family? What would have happened to another family, another black child? Would he have been dismissed as unruly? Would we have been labeled the problem for complaining? Would anyone have listened? Would anything have been done?" Her questions hung in the air, each one a powerful indictment of the systemic prejudices they had just faced. It wasn't a personal complaint. It was a diagnosis of the sickness within the airline's culture. David placed a hand on Lena's shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of her words. "That's why we're here. My love," he said softly, a promise embedded in his tone. He then turned his gaze from Amelia, letting it sweep over the crew who were huddled near the galley like frightened sheep. His eyes found Mark. "Mark," he said. The flight attendant flinched as if struck. "Come here, please." Trembling Mark shuffled forward, his face pale and slick with sweat. He couldn't meet David's gaze, his eyes fixed on the plush carpet. "Look at me," David commanded, not with anger, but with an unnerving stillness that demanded obedience. Mark hesitantly raised his eyes. "I want you to understand what happened tonight from my perspective. You saw a family with a valid ticketing issue, and you accepted the first no as a final answer because it was the path of least resistance. You saw a passenger verbally abusing a 10-year-old child, and you chose to placate the aggressor because she seemed more important, more powerful. You prioritized the comfort of a bully over the safety and dignity of a child. And then you witnessed a physical assault and you froze. You did nothing." David took a step closer. "This isn't about a lack of training in your employee handbook, Mark. We can teach procedures. We can't teach courage. We can't teach basic human decency. You failed a fundamental test of character tonight." Mark finally broke. Sobs racked his body. "I'm sorry." He wept, the words barely audible. I was intimidated. I know," David said, cutting him off, though not unkindly. "She was designed to intimidate. But your job, your only job, is to protect every passenger on this plane, especially the most vulnerable. You failed." He then turned his attention to the purser, a stern woman in her 50s named Brenda, who had maintained a rigid posture of defiance. "And you," David said, his voice hardening slightly. "Your crew member brought a serious safety and security issue to your attention before we ever left the gate. You dismissed it. You were too busy with the manifest to intervene. Let me be perfectly clear, the safety and well-being of the passengers is the manifest. It's the only one that truly matters. You are the leader on this aircraft, and you let your entire team fail under your watch." Brenda opened her mouth, a retort about pre-flight protocols on her lips, but she snapped it shut as she saw the look on Amelia Vance's face. Amelia stepped forward, her expression leaving no room for negotiation. "Mr. Hayes, they will both be escorted off the plane and placed on immediate indefinite suspension, pending a full investigation, which I will personally oversee. The same goes for the gate agent, Susan. We have her on camera, and her employment with Aerovista is terminated effective immediately. Their access badges and credentials will be revoked before we leave this airport." David gave a slow, deliberate nod. He took no pleasure in their ruin, but he knew that true change required accountability. It had to be swift, decisive, and visible. It was then that he turned to face the other passengers, who had been watching this corporate trial unfold with a mixture of fear and fascination. Across the aisle, the businessman in 3F, a man named Richard Sterling, who had so curtly refused to switch seats, looked deeply ashamed. He'd been annoyed at the disruption of a family. Now he understood he had been a silent accomplice to their humiliation. "Ladies and gentlemen." David's voice was calm again, but it filled the cabin with an undeniable authority. "First and most importantly, I want to apologize to all of you. This flight was a catastrophic failure of our service, our values, and our promise to you. Your journey has been significantly disrupted, and you were forced to witness an event that should never happen on any airline, least of all this one. This is not the standard of service or safety that Aerovista stands for, or that it will stand for going forward." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "We are bringing a new aircraft to the adjacent gate. A new, fully briefed crew is already on their way to operate your continued flight to London. We hope to have you on your way within 90 minutes. However, for your immense trouble and your patience, Aerovista will be refunding the entire cost of your round-trip ticket. Furthermore, we will be crediting each of your frequent flyer accounts with 200,000 miles. Our ground staff will have all the details for you when you deplane. We thank you for your understanding." A wave of stunned whispers rippled through the passengers. It was an act of corporate contrition, so massive it was almost unbelievable. Richard Sterling, the businessman, unbuckled his seatbelt and stood. "Mr. Hayes," he said, his voice humbled. I owe you and your family an apology. I was asked to help to switch seats, and I refused. I was arrogant and selfish. I saw a problem, and I chose to ignore it because it was inconvenient for me. I am deeply sorry for my part in this." David looked at the man, seeing not an enemy, but a teachable moment. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling. Apology accepted. All I ask is that next time you see someone in need of a small kindness, you remember tonight." Amelia Vance's team moved with practiced efficiency. The passengers were deplaned first and led to a private lounge where staff were already waiting with refreshments and paperwork for their refunds. The disgraced crew were escorted away by airline security. Finally, Amelia turned to the Hayes family. "We have the chairman's suite ready for you in the Polaris lounge," she said. "It's completely private. You can rest there while we finalize the new aircraft." The walk through the now empty first-class cabin was surreal. As they passed seat 7B, Lena instinctively pulled Leo a little closer, shielding him from the ghost of the woman who had been sitting there. In the quiet of the exclusive chairman's suite, a luxurious room hidden away from the main lounge, the family finally had a moment to breathe. The adrenaline began to fade, leaving a residue of exhaustion and raw emotion in its wake. Leo, who had been so brave, finally let his composure crumble. "Did that lady go to jail?" he asked his dad, his voice small. "Is it my fault?" David knelt down, pulling his son into a hug. "Listen to me, Leo. That lady made a terrible choice, and yes, she is in very serious trouble with the police. But you need to know with all your heart that none of this was your fault. Not one single bit. You did nothing wrong. She was wrong. The people who were supposed to help us were wrong. You were just being a kid. Do you understand? Leo nodded, wiping his eyes. Maya, who had been a silent observer through the whole ordeal, finally spoke, her voice trembling with a 12-year-old's burgeoning sense of justice. I saw the way she looked at us, Dad, at the gate, before we even got on the plane. She looked right through you, like we didn't belong in first class. David looked at his daughter, his heart aching. You're right, Maya, she did. Some people in this world have a sickness in their hearts. They judge people by the color of their skin instead of the content of their character. It's ugly and it's wrong. Tonight we showed her that her way of seeing the world is not welcome here. Not on our airline. Not anywhere. Lena, having composed herself, turned to David. David, for a moment up there, when you were so calm, so quiet, I was furious with you. She confessed, her voice thick with emotion. I wanted to scream, to fight to tear that woman apart with my bare hands, and you were just watching. David took her hands in his. I know. And I am so sorry I couldn't just be your husband in that moment. But I wasn't just a husband, Lena. I was the chairman of the board, witnessing a 5-alarm fire in my own house. I saw the gate agent's dismissiveness. I saw the flight attendant's cowardice. I saw the purser's indifference. I saw the passenger's bigotry. It wasn't one problem. It was a chain of failures. If I had exploded, I would have just been another angry passenger. By being calm, I was able to observe everything. I was collecting evidence. I needed to understand the full scope of the disease before I could begin to cure it. He opened his laptop. His fingers flew across the keyboard. This is what I was doing in my head, he said, turning the screen to her. It was a draft of an email addressed to the entire board of directors and every senior executive at Aerovista. The subject line was stark zero tolerance, effective immediately. The email detailed the events of Flight AV282 without emotion, like a legal brief. It then outlined a new non-negotiable directive, the Aerovista Family First policy. Any ticketing issue that separated a minor from their guardians was now a Level 1 priority, empowering gate agents and flight crews to offer whatever compensation was necessary, including cash vouchers and future flight credits to other passengers to resolve the situation before boarding. Failure to resolve it was not an option. It also announced a mandatory company-wide retraining program on de-escalation, cultural sensitivity, and unconscious bias to be designed by a leading independent firm and implemented within 60 days. I can't just fire a few people and expect things to change, he said, looking back at his family. We have to change the rules of the game. An hour later, they were escorted to Gate C-34, where a pristine new Boeing 707 awaited them. The new captain, a warm-faced man named Frank Miller, met them on the jet bridge. He didn't offer a corporate apology. He offered a human one. Mr. and Dr. Hayes, he said, shaking their hands firmly. My name is Frank Miller. I'll be flying you and your family to London tonight. I've read the report. What you went through is a disgrace. On behalf of my crew and all the decent, hard-working pilots at this airline, I want to personally guarantee your safe, comfortable, and respectful passage. It will be our honor to fly you. This time, as they boarded, the atmosphere was entirely different. The new crew greeted them with genuine smiles. They were shown to their seats. 2A, 2B, 2D, and 2E, a perfect family pod at the front of the cabin. As Leo buckled himself in, next to his father, the reality of the night's events finally seemed to crystallize in his young mind. "Dad?" he asked, his voice filled with a 10-year-old's wonder. "Does this mean you own all the airplanes?" David chuckled a deep, warm sound of relief. He put his arm around his son's shoulders. "Yes, son. In a way, I guess it does," he said, looking around the cabin at his family together and safe. "But owning something like this doesn't just mean you get to fly wherever you want. It means you're responsible for everyone who flies with you. It's like a superpower. You don't use it to show off or to get your way. You use it to protect people, to fix what's broken, and to make sure everyone, no matter who they are or what they look like, is treated with kindness." As the plane finally took off, soaring into the inky blackness above the Pacific for the second time, David Hayes looked not out the window, but at his wife and children. He hadn't wanted this fight. He had just wanted a vacation. But the world had forced his hand, and in doing so had clarified his new mission. The journey to London was finally underway. But the far more important journey, the one to rebuild the soul of Aerovista Airlines, had just begun. In the end, it was never just about a seat on an airplane. It was about dignity, respect, and the courage to stand up to injustice no matter how quietly it's done. David Hayes reminded an entire corporation, from the flight attendants to the executive board, that the most valuable asset they have is their humanity. Karen Miller learned a brutal lesson. The cost of prejudice can be far higher than a first-class ticket, and it can lead to criminal charges and public humiliation. This story is a powerful testament to the fact that the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful. What do you think? Was the karma served to Karen Miller and the airline staff deserved? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of justice moved you, please show your support by hitting that like button, sharing it with someone who needs to see it, and most importantly, subscribing to our channel for more incredible real-life stories where karma doesn't miss. Your support helps us bring these important narratives to light. Thanks for watching.